Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Creating Recipients. In this lesson, we're going to talk about creating recipients for Exchange 2013. Now, on the surface, that may seem like a very narrowed topic, but there are many different recipient types, and they all have features and properties that must be explored thoroughly in order to know what you can and cannot do with each one. So what we're going to do here is we're going to define each of the recipient types that you can quickly and easily create in Exchange 2013. We're going to take a quick walking tour of Exchange 2013 recipient types, and then we're going to look back at our scenario and we're going to look at performing different tasks that you might perform in a real-world environment. Okay, so let's get started. So when we're looking at the Exchange Admin Console, or the EAC, under the Recipient feature, you're going to see a grouping of tabs, and the first tab is Mailboxes. Under the Mailboxes tab, the most common type of recipient is the user mailbox. With user mailboxes, each mailbox is associated with an Active Directory account. And so, creating those mailboxes, working with those mailboxes, that is going to be really the bulk of your management when it comes to recipient type management, working with user mailboxes. We're going to cover that in a future lesson in greater detail. But creating those user mailboxes can be done from either existing accounts that you have in Active Directory, or if you have the proper permissions, you can create both user mailboxes and their corresponding Active Directory accounts at the same time. And so we'll take a look at this in a moment. At the same time, another mailbox recipient type is the linked mailbox recipient type. This is accessed by users in a separate trusted forest, and oftentimes the reason you create a linked mailbox is, let's say you have Exchange deployed as a resource forest. So with a resource forest scenario, this allows an organization to keep Exchange centralized in a single forest, but allowing access to the Exchange organization with user accounts that can be located in one or more trusted forests. So these are called account forests. So these linked mailboxes have mailboxes in the Exchange forest, but they link off to accounts that are located in other forests. So what happens is a disabled user account exists in the same forest as Exchange, and it's created and associated with that corresponding linked mailbox. But again, it's a disabled account, so those users cannot log in to that Exchange forest. They can log into their account forest and then can access their mailboxes that are linked to the Exchange forest. If that sounds a bit confusing, that's okay. Remember, that's only done in specific circumstances where you might set up your scenario in this way with Exchange deployed as a resource forest. If you're not doing that, if you have your accounts in the same forest as your Exchange environment, which many people do, most people do, I would say, then you don't need to ever create a linked mailbox. Now the next type of recipient is a group recipient, and that you'll find at the top of the tabs as well. Under the Groups tab, under the Recipient feature, you'll see that you can create several types of groups. The first type is a distribution group. Now a distribution group is a mail-enabled Active Directory group that's static and based on group membership, and it can only be used to distribute messages. In other words, you can use the distribution groups by emailing that group, and then whatever users are part of that group as part of the group membership will get emails because it's been sent to the one group. However, you cannot assign resources to that group. So whether it's a folder or a printer or some other network resource, you cannot use a distribution group to provide permissions to those resources. It's an Active Directory group, but its sole purpose is to distribute messages, and that's it. That's different from the next type of group, and that is a security group. So you can create a security group either through Active Directory and the Active Directory tools, or through the Exchange tools, whether it's the EAC or the EMS. And what happens is this security group is an Active Directory Universal Security Group. Now, it too can be used to distribute messages. So you can email an Active Directory Universal Security Group, and it will act just like a distribution group. But at the same time, this Active Directory Universal Security Group can also be used to assign permissions to resources. So that's the distinction between a distribution group and a security group. So the similarity between the two groups is that you can use both for distributing emails, and both are static, so they're based on group membership. But the difference is with the security group, you can also provide access to resources through permission settings, and you can't do that with the distribution group. Now, the third recipient type under groups is called dynamic distribution groups. These are very interesting because they use filters to create the group based on those filters and based upon conditions that are established, so that persons can be part of the group or removed dynamically based on their attributes, and the group membership is derived at the time any given message is sent. So imagine a distribution group that's based upon location, let's say Orlando. And so if, as part of your Active Directory attributes, you have it listed that your location is Orlando, then any individuals in the Orlando area, when you send an email to the dynamic distribution group that's established with Orlando as the location, well, those individuals will automatically be sent an email. However, if an individual, let's say, moves to Chicago, and their location is now moved to Chicago in their Active Directory attributes, then when an email is sent to that group again, they will not receive that email. And nothing really has changed on the Exchange side or even the distribution group side. It's just that once a person falls outside of those parameters and no longer meets the conditions that have been established, then they're not included as part of the group. And this happens immediately. So the moment you change a person's location, and now they fall outside of the scope of that group, well, then the next time an email is sent to that distribution group, they will not be considered part of the group. They won't get that email. So as a result, dynamic distribution groups are really interesting. However, you have to make sure that people have their attributes updated in Active Directory in order to ensure that they're in the groups that they belong in. The next recipient type in the tab section is called resources, and there are two different mailbox types under resources. The first is the equipment mailbox. This is used for scheduling purposes for items like projectors, laptops, even company cars, or whatever items really need to be managed. What's interesting is when you create an equipment mailbox, persons can have access to the calendaring side and scheduling use of that equipment, but there is no account that actually accesses the equipment mailbox, and we'll see that in a moment. However, you can delegate individuals that can approve or deny the use of that equipment. The room mailbox is used for scheduling purposes for various meeting locations, like the conference room, the auditorium, the lab, a training room, and so forth. And so, you know how in days of old, when you wanted to schedule the use of a room, conference room 1, conference room 2, and so on, you might have an individual that was responsible for the calendar for that room. And so you would have to request, hey, can I use the conference room for this time frame? And they would check and say, well, no, the conference room is busy, you can't use it then. And then you would say, well, what other times are available? And you would do this back and forth dance. So the nice thing about a room mailbox is that you can check the calendar of the mailbox, and see when is that room available, and then request use of that room. And then depending on whether or not you have it set up where a delegate has to confirm the use of that room or not, you can have immediate confirmation that you have that room, or you can wait for someone else to confirm that the room is yours for that time. The next recipient type is contacts. Now, there are two different types of contacts, and they're similar, except that they have one unique difference. So the first is a mail contact. This is an Active Directory contact that is mail-enabled, using an external email address. So when you create a mail contact, there is an Active Directory object that's created, and it's a contact object, and it's mail-enabled in that there's an external email address. Let's say it's a yahoo.com, a hotmail.com, or whatever. It can be another company.com. It doesn't matter. But it's not a mailbox that is maintained by your Exchange organization. The value of a mail contact is that this might be an outside vendor or someone that's working with your organization, and you want to have that in the address list so that persons can quickly and easily find that individual, and send them an email. So that's why you have these mail contacts. However, a mail contact does not have the ability to log into the Active Directory and access resources. So even though there's an object in Active Directory for that contact is not an Active Directory account that can log in and access various network resources. And that's what makes it different from a mail user. A mail user is an Active Directory user account that can log into Active Directory and can be assigned permissions to access resources, but instead of having a local mailbox in the Exchange organization, they have an external email address. So they're still an Active Directory user, they still have all of the benefits of that, but they're not using a mailbox within your Exchange environment. So they might have, again, a yahoo.com, a hotmail.com, whatever's the case. And so their mailbox is taken care of by someone else. You simply provide the external email address, and now they can be part of the address lists and part of a search that a user can do in order to send email. So two different types of contacts, with the one big difference being that the mail user can actually log into Active Directory and have access to resources. The next recipient type that you'll see up at the top in the tabs is called the shared mailbox. Now, the shared mailbox is not associated with a single user, but is shared by many users as a collaboration tool. So shared mailboxes are great for people to monitor and or send email from a common account, like if you have an info@spytech.prime or a sales@spytech.prime. So individuals would email that account, and then let's say you have a variety of different salespeople, they can check that account for emails coming in, and then they can respond back from that account so that the emails are going to and from a common account. And it doesn't really matter if people come and go, if individuals who are in sales, let's say, are hired or fired, but that doesn't change the email address that's used for people to check in with sales. So that's what's great about a shared mailbox. That's one use for a shared mailbox, and you can certainly think of other usage cases depending on your environment and the organization structure that you're dealing with. Now, you create these mailboxes, and then you can grant full access, send as, or send on behalf delegate permissions. And so that allows you the ability to give individuals the ability to either view the content that's coming in and then respond to those emails, either send as or send on behalf of. Okay, so let's jump over to our server at this point, and let's take a walking tour of some of these different recipient types, and then we'll come back to the slides and we'll map out what our scenario is going to be so that we can get a feel for what it would be like to work in a real company and have to create recipient types for that company. Okay, and so here we are in our Exchange Admin Center, and so you can see on the Features pane we have Recipients selected. The tabs up here at the top are the ones we discussed: Mailboxes, Groups, Resources, Contacts, and Shared. We didn't discuss migration because migration basically relates to moving mailboxes from one place to another, so that's not connected back to our discussion of recipient type creation. Under Mailboxes, we can see the administrator mailbox. We can also see, if we select the down arrow, we can create a new user mailbox or a linked mailbox. Now, if we click linked mailbox, remember we talked about this. A linked mailbox is a mailbox associated with an external account, and so it says at least one forest or domain trust must exist before you can create a linked mailbox. So you recall, a linked mailbox is useful when you have Exchange installed in a resource forest and the accounts are in an accounts forest. In this case, we don't have that, so we cannot even create a linked mailbox at this point. That's okay, we can create a user mailbox. And so when we create a new user mailbox, we put in the alias. We can create this using an existing user, where we would then browse and we would look for those users in Active Directory. Currently, we have no additional users. We can search for those, and we can browse and we can find them, and we can create additional users in that way. Or we can create a new user, put in all of the information, and then that user would actually be created in Active Directory, and their mailbox would be created at the same time. So we're not going to get into all of the various options at this point, the mailbox database and so on. Once you create the mailbox, you can then manage the mailbox using various settings, and we'll discuss that in a future lesson. Under Groups, you can see that we can create those distribution groups, security groups, and dynamic distribution groups. Within dynamic distribution group, if we select that, you can see that we have to provide the various conditions. We can select the member type as far as the recipient type that we want as part of the group, and then we can add rules, and then we can decide what kind of rule. For example, we talked about location, let's say state or province. We can say we want this individual to be part of the state of Florida. And so now if individuals are part of the state of Florida, they would automatically be added to the dynamic group. The next tab has resources, and from there we can create room mailboxes and equipment mailboxes. So we select one of these, and then we can put in the room name, we can put in things like the capacity, and then we can say whether or not we want to accept or decline booking requests automatically, or select delegates who can accept or decline booking requests. Note that the email address, if we select here, it says a room mailbox has an email address, but it doesn't have an associated account to sign in to the mailbox. So we don't sign into this. It's not a mailbox that you send email to. It's simply a way to utilize the calendaring features. So that's good to know. The same is true when it comes to the equipment mailbox. We put in the equipment name, and then we can establish booking requests to either accept or decline automatically, or select delegates who can accept or decline booking requests. Then we have contacts, and here we have those mail contacts or mail user contacts. And again, you recall that the difference between the two is that a mail user contact is someone who actually has an Active Directory account where they can log into the domain and access network resources, but they use an external email, as opposed to a mail contact who has a contact account in Active Directory, so they cannot log into the domain, but they also have an external email address. And then we have those shared mailboxes where you can see here we put in the display name, we choose the organizational unit, email address, and then we can decide who we're going to give full access to, send as access to, and if we click more options, we can provide an alias and more information like archive, address book policy, and so on. Okay, so that's your walking tour of the various recipient types. Now let's jump back over to our slides, and we're going to look at our scenario and design out what we can do from this point forward to now start creating those recipients. At the same time, it would be good once we have some recipients created if we could take a look at logging into their mailbox to make sure that they're actually able to send mail to other persons within the organization. Now keep in mind, at this point, we have not configured our Exchange environment to send email to the outside world or receive email from the outside world. However, with recipients within the organization, once they're created, they should be able to connect right up with Outlook or use Outlook web app and immediately have the ability to send email back and forth, at least within the organization. So we're going to demonstrate that in a moment as well. Alright, so going back to the concept that we're part of a team that's working for SpyTech Prime, and I'm taking lead on this as the primary Exchange administrator. You're my assistant, my Padawan, my protege, and so we're working together to accomplish the goal of getting our Exchange environment set up. We have Exchange installed, we have moved forward, and we're ready to begin creating recipients. So the first thing we're going to do is a new hire named John Smith has started with the company today. We're going to create a mailbox-enabled user, so we have to create his Active Directory account as well as his mailbox all at the same time. We're going to do that first. We're going to test and make sure that the administrator can send an email to John Smith and that John receives that email through Outlook web app. The next thing we're going to do is there's a user named Carol Jones. We're going to mailbox enable her user account through the Exchange Admin Center. And then we're going to move forward and we're going to use the Exchange Management Shell to mailbox enable all 25 employees. And in actuality, the administrator's account is already mailbox enabled, and when we create John Smith and Carol Jones, that will enable those as well. So we're only going to mailbox enable 22 employees, but that's okay. You get the point. We're going to do this as an in bulk move using the Exchange Management Shell. And then we're going to move the administrator's mailbox or migrate that mailbox over to database 2. And the reason for this is because as we create these additional mailboxes for John Smith, for Carol Jones, and for the other 23 employees, well, we're actually going to be putting them into database 2, which we haven't talked about databases just yet, but we're putting them all in there because it's an easier name to remember. So the default database that's created is this really long number code at the end. And so rather than worry about remembering that, it's easy to just create a new database and then drop all of your mailboxes in there. But the administrator's mailbox is still back in the old database. So we're going to migrate that account over. In addition, we're going to create the following: a room mailbox for conference room 1, an equipment mailbox for the projector, a shared sales mailbox, a distribution group for sales, and then a dynamic distribution group based on location. So let's say we have a grouping of people working in Florida. We're going to create a dynamic distribution group that will be able to send email to anyone who is listed as being in Florida according to their Active Directory attributes. So, some exciting stuff here. Let's jump in, let's go over to our server, and let's begin the process of creating recipients. And very exciting, we're going to make sure that our email works internally. Okay, let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is create a mailbox-enabled user named John Smith through the Exchange Admin Center. So we'll click the little plus sign here. It asks us to first put in an alias, and it says the user's alias is the portion of the email address on the left side of the @ symbol. So in our case, we're using a john.smith type alias. It's asking if it's an existing user, and no, we're going to create a new user. First name, John Smith. That's a good display name, and the name is down below. The organizational unit, we actually want to put John in an organizational unit. Instead of exchange users, we'll put him right in the users container. We click OK. His login can be the same as the alias, John Smith. We'll give him a password. And then typically when creating a new user, you would click Require Password Change on the next logon. We're going to leave this alone at this point. We can click More Options, click Browse. We're going to put him in Database 2. There's 2 databases at this point, and we'll click OK and save. Not to worry, we're going to discuss databases in greater detail in a future lesson. Okay, and there we have it. We have John Smith. So we're just using the local server name with a secure socket connection with HTTPS with Outlook Web App. We're already logged in as administrator, so at this point we're going to send the email over to John Smith. Okay, so this is our administrator's Outlook Web App. We click New Mail, to John Smith. It found us right away there. Test email. And we hit send. All right, now let's jump over and we'll log out here. And let's sign in as John Smith. The first time you sign into Outlook web app, you have to provide your time zone and so forth. And we can see that John Smith has functional email. He has his mailbox up and running. We see the email came through from the administrator. That tells us that the Exchange server, at least from an internal perspective, is working properly. So that's a good sign. And even though we know we cannot send email outside the organization or receive it from the outside at this point, that's okay. At least we know we can send email to each other. And we know that our mailboxes are working properly. Great. We need to create more mailboxes at this point. We're going to have to log in again to the Exchange Admin Center as administrator. We can close John Smith's Outlook web app. Okay, so from here, we're going to mailbox enable an existing user named Carol Jones. And so we'll do that by clicking, again, the new mailbox. In this case, we're going to use an existing user. We click Browse. And we can look and see here's Carol Jones and say OK. So now we don't have to put in all of this extra information. We will put in her alias. We scroll down. We can choose more options. For example, we want to put her as well in Mailbox Database 2, and we say OK, and then save. Okay, and there Carol Jones's mailbox is created. Great. So the next thing we need to do is, you saw when we went to create the mailbox that we had a ton of existing users here in the Exchange Users folder. There's about 23 different users there. None of them have mailboxes at this point. And so we could go through and create a mailbox for each one individually. However, we've mentioned that PowerShell is perfect for this type of quick, fast, bulk operation. So let's prove that. Let's open up our Exchange Management Shell. Okay, and so we're going to use the get-user commandlet to grab a hold of these users that are in an organizational unit called Exchange Users, and then we're going to enable their mailboxes using the enable-mailbox commandlet. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to type get user dash organizational unit Exchange users. We will pipeline that out to enable-mailbox, and we'll tell it what database to put it in, database 2, and we hit enter. Okay, and so it looks like everything went forward. If we look here, however, we don't see those mailboxes. But again, this is a web-based interface, so hitting the refresh fixes that problem. And now you can see that we have those various mailboxes here. So we were able to, in bulk, create those 23 mailboxes, and now we have a total of about 25 people that work for SpyTech Prime that now have mailboxes here in our Exchange organization. Now, you'll note that they all are in database 2, whereas administrator was created in the default database. And this is where our migration option comes into play. We can select migration, and here we can create a new local mailbox move. We can select the users we want to move. In this case, it's administrator, just administrator. And we're going to move administrator over to the new target database, database 2. We'll give the batch a name. And we're not going to move any archive mailboxes, so we're just moving the primary mailbox. We don't have an archive database set up for this user. We click Next. You can see that a report will be sent, and we're going to have this automatically start the batch. We click New. And we can see now that this batch has been taken care of. We see the move admin. It says synced, finalized, failed. If we refresh, we see that it's syncing. And so we'll let it complete, but ultimately we're going to have all of our mailboxes in database 2. So that's how you would move them. Obviously, you typically wouldn't just move the one user. You would move a grouping of users over to the other database, but that's pretty much how you use the migration tools. So now we have all of our users, 25 users with mailboxes, and they're all in database 2. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a resource room mailbox, and this is for conference room 1. You want to make sure that it's a name that is easy for users to find, so calling it what it is, conference room 1, is perfect. For the email address, we can just have it be cr1@spytechprime. We don't have to choose an organizational unit. It will go in the default users container if we don't. Location, we can put in some information. First floor, near entrance. We can provide a phone number. We can provide a capacity. Let's say 20 persons can comfortably sit in the room. And then in this case, instead of selecting delegates, we're going to let it accept or decline booking requests automatically based upon first come, first serve. And we say save. Very good. The next thing we're going to do is create an equipment mailbox for our high-tech projector. Again, we're going to leave it as the user's container. We're not going to provide delegates to accept or decline booking requests. Although we could select the second option here and then select the plus sign and let the administrator, or let's say one of these other individuals, will allow Bethany here to be the one who handles the delegation. And then click Save. Perfect. So we have our room and our equipment mailbox types there. We're going to create a shared sales mailbox. If there was a sales organizational unit, we could put the sales mailbox in there. This mailbox will be for info@SpyTechPrime. So let's say the website has an info@SpyTechPrime email address listed for sales, and so we'll put it there. And so at this time, we're not really certain as to who we're going to provide access to. We will provide full access to David Walker. He's the head of sales. And later on, we can always adjust this and add additional persons and give them send as permissions and so forth. And being that we're discussing sales, let's go back to our groups. And we're going to create a distribution group for sales. We could put this in an organizational unit. Currently, the owners are administrator. We can add group owners as members. We can add additional members as we look here. So we know some of the persons who are working in sales. We put them in. Now they are statically a part of that distribution group. We can choose whether owner approval is required to join the group. And you can see the default is open. Anyone can join this group without being approved by the group owners. Let's have owner approval and then choose whether the group is open to leave. Members can leave the group at any point or not. In this case, let's say members can only be removed by group owners. Remember, this is specific to the sales team, so we want to make sure that members of the sales team get emails that are sent to it, so we don't want it to be where they can leave whenever they want, unless they're fired, and then certainly they can leave everything. But at this point, we have owner approval and we have it closed off so that members of the group can only be removed by the group owners. We click Save, and there's our distribution group. And now if we wanted to create a dynamic distribution group, we can create a Florida-based distribution group, let's say. We can choose the owner of that group. We know that Veronica is the one that actually heads up the team in Florida. So in this case, we're going to allow all recipient types, although we could narrow it down to users with Exchange mailboxes if we want. But we'll leave it as all recipient types. We'll add the rule. We'll choose the state or province. We hit the little plus sign. OK. We click OK. There it is, and we click Save. So now when you send an email to the Florida Dynamic Distribution Group, any individuals who have that listed in their Active Directory attributes as being part of Florida, being in the state of Florida, well, now they will get emailed with anyone else in that distribution group that is created on the fly dynamically. So you can see creating these different recipients, it's not very difficult to do. It's essential to know how each of these different recipients work so that you know when to create a contact, you know when to create a group, and you know which type of contact or group to create and so forth. It's essential that you have this really clear in mind because obviously the whole point of Exchange is to be able to manage recipients. And that doesn't just include mailboxes, it includes all of these various different types of recipients. Alright, so we've done quite a bit in this lesson. We'd like to thank you for watching. We hope you found it informative, and we'll see you in the next lesson.